You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
Oh, that's amazing.
I know.
Yeah.
The technology is just...
we're living in the future, Ken. We're living in the future.
We're living in the future right now. It's right. It's happening right now. Okay, great. Let's do this, man.
Yeah.
This is Ken Vellante with Something Rather Than Nothing, and I'm pleased to have Matt Hall as a guest. Matt Hall is an artist in Portland. I was drawn in by his images, his installations, which use bones and other material in order to create his unique installations. Matt Hall, welcome to Something Rather Than Nothing.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, we'll get more into your art and about what you're doing with it and what it is for the listeners. But prior to getting into that, I know from your bio, and you grew up in Southern Oregon. But the main question related to when you were younger is, when you were born, when you were younger, were you already an artist?
I don't really think so. I think if an artist is someone who is a participant in making art, then I don't think anyone can be born an artist. I think it's to be an artist is to participate in an activity. So you have to make art to be an artist. I think I was definitely born with a need for maybe an interior space. I have a lot of siblings. I grew up in a really small house. There wasn't any privacy. And I think I craved that kind of aloneness that can come with making things. I craved that ability to be private in a way, to sort of carve out that space. And that interior space is something that I always wanted and always needed. So I think I was born with that propensity, but not necessarily. I don't really think anyone is born an artist per se. I think being an artist is about doing the work. It's about putting the work in, making art. That's, it's a lot of work to be an artist. It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of activity that is not always fun. And it's a lot of grinding out the days that it's hard when you don't have inspiration, or you don't have ideas, or you don't have materials or whatever. And that, to me, defines an artist more than just saying you're an artist. I think you really have to do the action of making art.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that too when you're saying about the labor and the process. So one of the things I noticed in how you talked about what I've read, with an interview with you, is that there's a lot of labor and there's a lot of days, and I noticed the word nothing, whereas like nothing seems to be happening. And in that space there, Matt, when you're creating your art, and it feels laborious, and it feels like this thing isn't what's occurring with this days of doing that. How do you maintain your practice in your vision of knowing where you're going for, if you have that period where it's like, this thing isn't changing, it isn't doing what I want? What happens for you during that process?
I think a lot of doubt. I think a lot of fear that it's going to fail, but also a lot of commitment to allowing it to happen. I think, I tried to sort of interject a certain amount of process-oriented failure that can happen in the work, so that throughout that waiting time and throughout that building up period, there can be a lot of change. I set an idea, I say, this is what I want to make, and then I'm willing to change it as I go through to allow for new ideas to come in. So throughout the process, there is a lot of boredom. There is a lot of time when the work is just extremely tedious, but also that tedium is sort of a space of meditation, a space of calm, because you're just doing these repetitive process over and over and over again. And in that, you can kind of consider the entire framework of what you're working on and the entire concept of what you're working on, and maybe new ideas or a new process come through that. And I leave room for that discovery, and and that's a lot of excitement there, is that there is discovery in that sort of boredom space.
Yeah. So, and let's get in specifically for the listeners where you are, and it's always a little bit difficult to. Sometimes I jump in and try to like, hey, let me describe Matt's art, and sometimes I have to. But one entry point I wanted to mention in the show recently, I've had there's some guests in talking about death. I mean, we had like spirits and ghosts and kind of these signals of life, kind of like that around this. And when I've talked to these guests, we kind of drove right into, affirmation of life, a recognition and reflection of death. And your works have a skeleton and as an installation of bones, death is in front of you, or at least the physical what's left after life has gone.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. And so you're going into that territory where other people, I mean, we all have a little bit of a freak out as we look at this and we get into that. When you're creating your installation, what is your intent? Are you trying to engage the viewer with death, mortality, or you're just kind of leaving these installations to stand on their own in their physicality?
I don't think I'm necessarily trying to talk about death per se. I think I am often talking about loss, and I am often talking about sort of repair and rejuvenation. But the macabre or the morbid side of it that you might immediately get from just seeing the pieces, from seeing a skeleton, let's say, isn't really on the forefront of my mind. The use of the animals is really about that the narrative makes sense to me as far as how I relate to the world. If like when I was growing up, for instance, I was never exposed to fine art. I never went to art museums. I never, saw beautiful paintings or whatever. And so, whereas someone who, let's say you grow up in New York and you go to the Met and you can see, Rothko, let's say, you might see that in person. You might look at that and say, this painting is sort of a map forward for me. This sort of shows me how I can explain my life, right? And then you might sort of decide, well, I'm going to paint these big paintings and that's the way I'm going to tell my story. And for me, I never had that specific fine art visual to get. So growing up on a farm, we saw things die all the time. We saw like a pig get butchered, or we would, maybe a sheep would die in the field or something. And that sort of visceral quality, that physicality of the body was very much part of my life. And in a way that becomes sort of I can look at that and say, oh, that's a map to explain my life. That's a way to go forward, So the using of the animals isn't really talking about death. It's just that the narrative makes sense. The dead animals or the corpses or the rebuilding of it makes sense within the way that I see my story and how to explain what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for that. I know you've one of the galleries I really enjoy in Portland is Antler Gallery.
Yeah.
And I know you've you had an exhibition there. I'm just giving a shout out to Antler because I see a lot of the artists, including yourself, who come through doing some amazing work, and feels like a unique place in Portland to find it. Matt, I want to, we're talking about your art, but, I always throw a little curveball or two to move back to the conceptual and make sure we got our what we're talking about down. Matt Hall, what is art?
I think, in my mind, art is sort of this acknowledgement that our experiences as humans, the experience of being a human is so vast and so nuanced and so complicated that we kind of need other ways to explain it, in a sense, to talk about it. And the way to do it is sort of to show the edges of it in a way, like we're sort of mapping out the peripheries of what we're seeing so that we can get a better sense of what it's like to be human. I always think about it in that periphery sense where, like, if you see something out of the periphery of your vision, let's say, but you look straight at it, you lose what it was. There's like a shadow there. And so much of life is like that, where we can't look directly at it. We have to sort of talk about it in these sidestepped ways so that we can understand it from the outside. And I think art is sort of an effort to do that, an effort to sort of build, the contours of this greater experience that we're having, that we don't know how to explain it. So we maybe we write songs about things, or we write a book about things, or we paint a picture about things, these feelings and these sensations that we don't know how to speak it. We don't know how to say it to other people. So we have to make these, methods that we can explain it all. So I think art is that.
Yeah. I'm sorry to jump in there, Matt, but I heard that because a big theme that comes up is like the ineffable, that which can't be said, And I think, honestly, I mean, one of the reasons I love the question, what is art, so much, because it seems to be a question on some of the experience of when you see Guernica by Picasso, if you see it in person, and the scope of it, and the mortality and war and guerra and death, you lose your breath. You can't speak. There's something in the experience of art sometimes that seems to be the ineffable, that we can't say. And the question about what is art is like, I like what you're saying. We're trying to get at it. You were trying to ease into it and saying, these are the contours of it. And
and like what you're saying, like with Guernica, like when Picasso paints this, he's saying something so much bigger than this painting. It's this huge painting about this amazing part of history, but it's also about human beings, and it's also about the story that he felt in his life, and he's telling a bigger story than he's telling a story to the future, he's telling a story to the past, he's telling the story in his present. And that's kind of the magic of art, is that it can move in that space. It doesn't have to be right where it stands at any given moment. Guernica is just as powerful today as it was when he painted it.
Right. It sure is. And it's like one of those great questions of art. How do you do that? Right. And 200 years, it might be the same thing. Right. So
Exactly.
Well, 200 years is a very optimistic number right now, but
if we're still around 200 years, then we're doing okay.
We'll leave aside that. Just for the moment. I have looked at your drawings that I've seen, and I've also looked at those in conjunction with your installations. And I just want to tell you, just kind of introduce it. I love looking at them, and I don't know for as the artist whether you have any intent to kind of pull them in conjunction, but the juxtaposition of like those drawings, I could see what I would call like the unformed or the looser, and it's such a different way of looking, I think, at what you were doing versus the installation itself. Can you just talk? I don't want that to be missed, because I hadn't seen them, and then I got really into your drawings. What's the interplay there, or do you mean a deliberate interplay with drawing and what you're trying to say or reach there?
It's definitely been something that I've struggled with through the years, is that my introduction in art was definitely through drawing, through, you know, pencil to paper sort of work. And so my feeling about that, drawing has always been a big part of how I think about art, how I think about making. Um, and it's always been something I've wanted to integrate more into my work. I struggle with it though, because it definitely requires a different mode of thinking for me, because my work is slow. The sculptural work is very slow because it requires a significant amount of preparation, and also engineering, and various things that I have to do. And then the drawing is much more spontaneous in a lot of ways, right? You can literally do it in that space immediately. They do interact in the fact that I'm trying to say similar things. I'm trying to talk about similar things. I don't know how well I've been able to explain that in my work. Like, I think that's always an effort for artists, is like, especially when you're trying to work in two different mediums.
Yeah.
You're trying to say the similar stories in a different way. And I think I've struggled with that. I haven't always been successful in that. But through the years, I've definitely worked to try to close that gap. Maybe I could do more. I don't know. But the drawing it has more of a, when I draw, I try to create an effort where I use a pen, so I can't erase. That's really important to me, because I want the action to be one action. I don't want there to be any opportunity to go backwards. Because I think within that you'll find it's like I have this thing about the trapdoor, a creative trapdoor, where you set up these spaces where you deliberately have mistakes sort of pre-planned in your way, and that will force you to work around them, and it makes you much more creative, I think. And in that drawing, I've set the trapdoor of not allowing myself to erase anything. So whenever there's a mistake, which there always is, because you always mess it up, I have to figure out a way to fix that. And I think that gives vibrancy and life to the work, the drawing work. It's harder to do that in sculpture, because sculpture is obviously in three-dimensional space, and it's defined by gravity, and it has to have a certain amount of it has to be museum quality, in a sense that it has to hold up to light and temperature, and all these other things. So I can't be so open and willy-nilly about it. I wish I could, and I try to. I'm slowly getting better at interjecting that kind of things into the sculpture. So
yeah. I wanted to mention one thing in seeing your art kind of evoked back to me when I had traveled once in the past to the Czech Republic, and there's this bone ossuary church in Sedlec, which is a Roman Catholic church. And so I walked into it, I was like, and there's bone chandeliers and then amongst the walls and everything. And it was so fascinating to me, because when I stepped in, my fundamental question was, I'm a New England Roman Catholic. I grew up New England Roman Catholic. And I'm there. I'm like, how is the bone church a Roman Catholic church, And it was just so fascinating to me, because it represented maybe a completely different connection, theologically, spiritually, and everywhere, where you're actually worshiping was like mortality, bones. But yet the whatever within, not getting into the religious part of it, but how that impacted the themes of anybody reflecting there, I have no idea. So it was, it
must have been huge. I mean, if you think about going to like these ossuaries where you do see the bones of your ancestors, or literally your own family members or whatever, you're going to be reflecting on your mortality all the time, right? Yeah. And you're going to be reflecting on the future that you have in heaven, let's say, or whatever, your second life. You're going to be reflecting on that because of the obvious objects in front of you. It's very, very tangible. I think it must be
Yeah.
huge, you know.
Yeah, that was probably it. Like, it was like it, boom, and I'm like,
Yeah,
how is this
it's right in
he?
front
And
of
like,
you.
what am I supposed to do with it?
Yeah.
You know, where's the frankincense in the robes? I don't.
Yeah. It's definitely a little less, definitely a little bit less clean slate sort of feeling of it, right?
Yeah. But yeah, one of the things, in part of this is for me, and is a separate question. I'm really interested in, like, when we're talking about drawing, and I know you've done painting, and I even saw a comment that you made about kind of like reflected on the relationship that you have, you know, with painting and how you, you know, try to move that. One of the things I found as I've developed personally as an artist, you know, here and there, moving into different forms, one of the things that has astounded me is that I have completely different relationships with what I create in each form.
Sure.
And I found that, like, for me, prior to moving into that, I had it in my head that I'm an artist. I'm going to feel like an artist here, and I'm going to feel like an artist here. But I have a very fun relationship with film. I have a very tortured relationship with painting. And, you know, I just found that whatever it is that I'm trying to do, none of it was the same. Do you find your relationships with the ways that I know you mentioned drawing and with the installation, but do you find a distinct relationship with the forms that you create?
I think for me, the work that's made is just a byproduct of the making. So in a way, they're all kind of the same. I mean, I struggle in different ways for each thing. Like, obviously they present different challenges, but if the really the like making of the art, the discovery that happens during it is really what I'm looking for. The end product just happens to exist, and that's a good thing for me, obviously. I mean, you can make stuff and it be a total disaster, and maybe you're not as satisfied. But when I work towards something, like if I have an idea and I say, oh, this idea is a drawing idea, and then I work towards it, and maybe I struggle, but I find little answers throughout that, and then I get to this end product that I'm like, oh, this is a tangible, nice thing that I am satisfied with. That gives me the exact same feeling as when I think, I'm going to make this sculpture and I have this idea and I'm going to do the exact same process to get to there. At the end, that feeling of discovery and that feeling, that release of being able to say a little more clearly what I'm trying to say in the world, is exactly the same.
Yeah.
So the medium doesn't really matter. It's the experience that I'm looking for.
I got
and
you.
The end result just happens to be different.
Yeah. I asked you, Matt, about what art is, and one of the bigger questions I think artists deal with, but I think even right now, you know, pandemic, social upheaval, last 2 or 3 years, all this stuff. What's the role of art? Like, is art still, you know, supposed to do the same thing for us humans, or what's the role of art?
Yeah. I don't, you know, I thought about this a lot. Like, what is the role of art? And I don't necessarily know from a social standpoint what the role of art is. I think from a personal standpoint, the role of art acts as a way to see and understand myself more. So the act of doing it gets me closer to myself, and maybe gets me closer to that part of myself that I either don't want to see or can't understand. Helps me understand my own life more. Helps me understand the people around me more.
Yeah.
Helps me understand how I act with the people around me, you know, how I connect to those people. It becomes sort of a microcosm of the world in a way. Like, if I start from nothing and I build an object through all of this ephemera or whatever, things that I find, and then I get to an end point. It has its own little lifetime, and in that little lifetime, it's sort of like living a life completely. It's like I can live a whole life right there and see where I went wrong, see the struggles, see the fears of failure, see the triumphs, see where at the end it wasn't exactly as I imagined it, but maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. Doing that over and over again is really, it's helped me immensely in just my everyday life, getting through the world. I know I can imagine this life as being just a giant end product of art. When I'm 90 or whatever, it's like that's the same thing as the end of a sculpture.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it just, for me, the role of art is just to help me understand and teach myself how to be a better human being, how to be more aware, how to be more in touch with the people around me and myself, and sort of understand my experience better.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I've been, as a philosopher and as somebody I've tried to develop my practice, I really connect with what you're saying as far as, there's a certain amount of like navigating life either through the art, or if you feel like completely shitty and then you look at something beautiful and then like half an hour you're like still smiling about it, you're like, that can't be bad. Like,
yeah,
like,
totally. And I think that's also like what is, this thing about art having more or less value than anything else in the world, I think is totally wrong in a lot of senses, because everything has similar value. Art is an important thing, and I think it's often undervalued, but is it more valuable than a teacher, or is it more valuable than a nurse? Or it's not. It's similar, but it's not more or less valuable. It's just a different thing, and they have different roles. So I don't know. I think we often put art on this like grandiose scale, but it's really just about getting closer to our experiences as humans than anything else.
Yeah, and I think that grandiose scale is something that comes up a lot, and it does cause confusion around the questions, right? Because when we mention like your answer for what is art, right? Somebody would answer, what is art? Art is what's in a museum. Somebody could say that.
Sure.
Somebody could say that.
And I think a lot of people believe that.
Right. And then there's this deference that, and it's fine. If it's in the museum, it's been anointed or whatever. And there's whole sorts of like issues around that. But I think what you're saying is like, it's more like part of like life, and it doesn't have to be granted. I think when I ask these questions, sometimes there's so much confusion because people are like, well, I don't know about museums. I don't know about Klimt, and I don't know this stuff, and I've never been to the Met. And I think part of both with like asking these questions, like with philosophy and art, is being like, shit, I didn't know what I was doing was art. I didn't know like that's what I was struggling with. And I think it can be helpful like to drop it down a tiny bit and be like,
Absolutely. And that's kind of a little bit what I was trying to say before about the idea of like growing up in a really rural spot that is sort of separated from that culture is when I came to school, when I came to art school, I think I had I still have a lot of insecurities about art education and art knowledge, and how I came and I was like, what do I have to say? Like I don't know anything about art. All my knowledge is like farm knowledge. I saw cows get born, or that sort of thing. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about, is this idea that like art could be anything. Art could be the smallest experience in the world, and it could be the biggest experience in the world. The atomic bomb could be art, but also, a mouse dying could be art. There's these huge ranges, and they have their value it's the same anyway. And I think that takes a long time as artists to think about and to really consider, because you want to be as honest as possible with your own experience. I think to be good at art and to make good art is about really trying to be honest about your own experience and talking about exactly how you feel in the world, an honest assessment of how you feel. I think when you start putting it into the context of the bigger art story, it can be overwhelming, and you often might say things that are not true to your experience.
Yeah. When you mentioned the horror of the atomic bomb as art, I thought of, I'm a huge Twin Peaks fan. Twin Peaks season 3, episode 8. You might be able to see the depiction of the atomic bomb as art. I have to slip in my footnote for my Twin Peaks friends amongst it. And this is the Pacific Northwest, right? So.
Yeah, of course.
Couple more big questions, Matt. What or who made you who you are?
Certainly my childhood, I think, informed me a lot. I have a lot of siblings, like I said before. I grew up in a really rural area. We were fairly poor and isolated, and I think that affected me a lot. Not always in good ways, but I think it definitely made me the way that I am, and made me capable of doing some of the things that I do, because I'm used to being alone. I'm used to being, I like being alone. I like long days in the studio by myself, ruminating on things. Partially because I spent a lot of time just wandering around by myself as a kid, ruminating on things, trying to escape my household. And so it kind of prepared me for doing what I do now. So I would say growing up, where my family life, my childhood, where I grew up, all those things definitely made me who I am. And also, I think that there is often this notion that an artist is like this island upon themselves, that they make amazing, here's this genius, and they make amazing things, and they do all these things by themselves. But really, it's like art is created in a community. There's no vacuum here. Part of what makes me able to do what I do is my partner, Madeline, and like my friends around me who help me source materials or teach me their skills, or, give me cheap studio spaces or whatever. Like, there's the gallery owners that help you have shows, and there's, owners of businesses that encourage you to do things like this. That's really important. I think that the thing that makes me who I am now is this community that we live in. It isn't, I'm not just an island, is what I'm trying to say. Like, I would love to take all the credit for what I do, but that would be unfair. There's too many people who help me out to take all that credit. It really is about the people around me, the family around me.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. No, I love that. Okay. Here's the big fastball coming at you. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah, I think, we're either telling a story in life or we're hearing a story in life. And it's like the thing that's in the center of it all is the story. The story always exists. So regardless, there's always something. It's just a matter of, are we going to discuss the narrative ourselves? Are we going to interject into the narrative by telling the story that we want to tell, or are we going to be reading the story that's told to us? The story always exists. There's always something. Mm-hmm. I think it's just a matter of how we're part of the narrative. Are we the tellers, or are we the viewers, right?
Yeah.
And that fluctuates at all times, I think. In different spaces, we're different people, right? Yeah. So I think that's, there's always something. I think it's just a matter of where we are in that and how we want to interact with it.
Yeah, I found in talking to artists about this, that word story
yeah
comes up a lot in this question. I would never predicted it like in my head conceptually before, but a lot of times it has to do with the story or what we're saying or we're telling you and I right now, or what you're trying to communicate with it. And I look, I love and have been obsessed with books since I could hold one, stories are I go there too.
Isn't that, I mean, that's what we're seeking all the time in life with everything. I mean, you think about everything we do as people, we're seeking stories. And I think our desire to understand the world in that way is so intense. It's so powerful. It's our whole motivation. We're always seeking stories and telling stories and wanting to tell our own story. And, making art is really about trying to tell your own story, explaining it, because everyone's experience is so different. And so we all have to figure out ways to be better at telling our stories. And so it's like this constant struggle to say, how can I do it better? How can I do it more clearly? How can I make it more honest? How can I tell my story more in a more concise way so that I can be understood a little more and I can understand others more?
Yeah.
I agree. I think a story is the key element of everything. It's every part of our lives are a story.
Yeah, I love that. I love that as well. Connecting with that. Hey, Matt, I want. I enjoy your art. I enjoy this discussion. I enjoy the drawings, the installations, the things that you do. But I want the listeners to enjoy and come in contact with them as well.
Yeah.
Where do folks go to find you?
I am on Instagram. It's at Matt Hall Art PDX. I have my website, which is matthallartpdx.com. Some of my work can be seen at Paxton Gate here in Portland. I occasionally have things there. I've done a lot of work for them. Occasionally I have shows in galleries around town. I'm a little bit on a stasis period now because of the kids, which is great, but it definitely takes up a lot of art time.
Yeah.
But I'm working back into it slowly but surely. So when I'm hoping, I have some things planned in the future. So I'm hoping I can carve out little spaces here and there to get more done. But yeah, they could definitely check my Instagram out. That's probably the best place to see what I'm working on any given day.
Yeah, and part of it with the show, and I'm sure you've seen, Matt, is that one of the things I've been proud of is to have a community around artists and around questions, around philosophy, around questioning, and what I'm saying is as you go along, something rather than nothing, listeners will definitely be hearing about the stuff that you and others have done. But I just wanted to tell you, Matt, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's been on its way for a little while in the background, but we got there. And so I've been really excited to chat with you, and I've really enjoyed the time. I really look forward to the things that you create, and wish you the best with your family. And if the art production goes down because you're tending to the needs of the most vulnerable mammal in the animal kingdom, the young human child, it is okay if we have to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, I tell myself that too. Sometimes it's hard, but I tell myself that it's all right. Kids have to eat lunch.
If we were mammals that produced children that just wandered off and hunted their own things, we'd be okay. But...
Yeah, but alas, we're not. So,
Matt, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for coming out to Something.
Thanks for having me, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, look forward to the wonderful things you create, and hope to hear more from you soon, brother.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
Take care now.
Okay, bye.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing,